In this tutorial, we're going to look at 3 more value drivers that we can get from the balance sheet. The first is plant, property, and equipment as a percentage of sales, otherwise known as net fixed assets as a percentage of sales. We're going to look at goodwill, and then we're going to look at other assets or other long-term assets as a percentage of sales for all of those categories of items that might not be feasible to forecast on their own. So let's start with plant, property, and equipment. Sales is often used as a driver for plant, property, and equipment. Your balance sheet may say net fixed assets. Same thing. We're going to forecast it as a percentage of sales. So I'm going to just set up my equation that my value driver, my percentage in my common size statement is going to be equal to plant, property, and equipment divided by total revenue or net sales. I hit return and it brings me back, and then I can just drag this over, and that will give me, if I can grab that, and drag it over, and those give me my percentages for plant, property, and equipment as a percentage of sales for those 3 years. I'm going to average them, and I'm going to use this average as my value driver. Goodwill is a tricky value driver because it usually stays the same, and when it increases, it's usually based on acquisitions or things that aren't necessarily going to be driven off of sales. So my preference with goodwill is to hold it constant. I would leave it as it is, even if you've noticed that it's changing, because it's not going to vary directly from sales. The last thing that I want to look at is this category of other assets. After goodwill, on our on our balance sheet under assets, we have intangible assets, accumulated amortization, other assets, deferred long-term asset charges. If you've got something that's really important for your firm, feel free to forecast it, create a value driver as a percentage of sales. But here, for this company, for Macy's, intangible assets and other assets are both so small that I'm going to clump them all together. So I'm going to start by deleting accumulated amortization, because I don't want to keep it if there's nothing in that row. And then here, instead of deferred long-term asset charges, I'm just going to change the title of this. I'm going to call this other long-term assets. And then what I'm going to do so that I know that I'm having a subtotal here is I'm just going to take these 3 things and I'm going to scoot them over to the right just a little bit so that I don't get confused. And to further my not getting confused, I'm going to call it total other long-term assets. And I'm just going to call this a sum of these few items here. Intangible assets and other assets. I'm going to carry that across, and then I'm going to create a value driver as a percentage of sales. So I can ignore these for now, and as a matter of fact, you could do a paste special so that you could get rid of these if you felt so inclined. And for the purpose of getting the value driver, I'm going to take my other long-term assets and divide them into total revenue. And then I'm going to drag it across. And since my percentages are so small, I feel like that's a reasonable thing to do for this firm. If you've got big percentages here, you're going to need to forecast line by line. So there we go. My other assets as a percentage of sales is going to be equal to the average of those at 4.44%. I'm going to save my file, and we're going to call that good. That's got us through all of our assets. Let me know if you have any questions.